This is the download recap from Sounds Profitable, the most important news from this week and why it matters to people in the business of podcasting. And as usual, I'm Gavin Gaddis. The download recap is brought to you by Podscribe. You can find out more at podscribe.com. This week's stories. I got some webinars to tell you about. Forget pod fade. Let's talk about creator fade. That one's from Tom Webster. Are podcasters and listeners missing the advantages of audio? It's from Paul Riesmandel at Signal Hill Insights. Acast and Little Dot Studios want a bigger piece of the YouTube podcast biz. And iHeartMedia makes Guaranteed Human a core branding message across all stations. Let's get started. Okay, before I get tucked into the top stories, let's talk about two upcoming webinars next week you should have on your radar. First up, The Creators 2025 is coming Wednesday, December 10th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tom Webster is going to debut an updated version of The Creators, which was the first ever study back in 2023 under his time as partner at Sounds Profitable. This new version, Creators 2025, surveyed over 5,000 respondents to get a snapshot of what podcast creators are like. Who's making shows? What's driving them to leave podcast production? You can register now, and even if you can't make the live webinar, it will make you one of the first people to get the report direct to their inbox after it's over. And for the second webinar, how and why to budget for podcast awards in 2026. This is a joint webinar from the Podglomerate and us at Sounds Profitable. That's going to be Thursday, December 11th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This webinar will allow you to find out which podcast awards should be budgeted into your podcasting expenses and how awards can help move the needle for your show growth targets. You can join in on that fun next week. All right, speaking of the Creators 2025, next week when we publish that, there's going to be a lot of new data in it. Tom Webster teases the report with an early slide this week showing a breakdown of how many respondents just consume podcasts. That's 83%. And how many are active creators? 12%. And following that, how many are lapsed creators? 6%. That 6% doesn't just represent someone who stopped making a particular podcast. It's people who stopped creating podcasts, period. Here's a quote from the article from Tom Webster. Quote, "The distinction here matters enormously. When someone ends show A and then starts show B, they're still in the ecosystem. They're still developing skills, building audiences, experimenting with formats, and contributing to the medium. They understand podcasting from the inside. They're advocates for the space, even when they're between projects. But when someone walks away from podcast creation entirely, we've lost something more fundamental. We've lost a voice, and we've lost an evangelist." End quote. Webster intends on investigating why creators are falling off podcasting with a future piece about the Creators 2025, but for now, he's planting a flag. Pod fade is not a problem of podcasts ending. It's a problem of creators leaving podcasting. If the industry wants to grow, it needs to understand why 1/3 of its creators burn out so hard they exit the medium entirely. As video content grows, it has brought with it a shift in consumption habits that are easy to miss when simply looking at whether audiences prefer video or audio podcasting. Paul Riesmandel from Signal Hill Insights highlights a stat from the Download, no relation, Fall 2025 edition, conducted with Cumulus Media. 88% of weekly podcast consumers who consume their last podcast at home prefer video you actually actively watch. A group that represents half of weekly podcast consumers overall. Podcasting as a medium was designed for on-the-go consumption. I mean, the name of the medium itself is based off an iPod. As Tom Webster has said many times before, podcasting in your ear while you're washing dishes or commuting or taking your dog for a walk isn't time spent. It's found time. Pivoting a video podcast towards being more reliant on the audience being focused on a screen stunts podcasting's potential for growth overall. Here's a quote from Riesmandel in the article. Quote, "At that same time, just under half of YouTube podcast viewers aren't making that migration off the platform. This means they're far less likely to take their podcasts on the go and use them to enhance their commutes, housework, or exercise, or other activities. This is a lost opportunity for every podcast on YouTube. End quote. The onus then lies on podcasters to actively remind newer audience members, making it clear what the phrase anywhere you get your podcasts actually means. Audiences love choice, but they have to know the choice exists. Otherwise, we're just super serving homebodies who might just want more good YouTube videos, regardless of whether they count as a podcast or not. This week, TubeFilter covers the announcement that Acast and Little Dot Studios have partnered to launch a UK-based program designed to increase ad opportunities for YouTube podcasters. The partnership, laid out in more detail in a press release I'm linking in today's post, allows Acast UK creators access to scaled ad inventory and growth support on YouTube, an adaptation to the needs of publishers, agencies, and holding companies by rolling out a comprehensive and managed option across the multiple media channels podcasting has evolved into. Here's a quote from Sounds Profitable's Brian Barletta about this announcement. Quote, "While managing 360-degree campaigns for creators isn't necessarily new for Acast, the expansion into utilizing native advertising tools such as streaming ad insertion on YouTube and creating a cohesive dashboard is new and exciting. This is the first opportunity offered at scale by a hosting platform to enable managed streaming ad insertion on YouTube for podcasters. SiriusXM's direct relationship as of yet doesn't extend to Simplecast publishers. And while there are several networks that have access to sell YouTube streaming ad insertion for their publishers, none are hosting platform." End quote. For our final top story today, Chief Programming Officer Tom Pohlman at iHeartMedia has made an announcement of iHeartMedia's guaranteed human mentality, a formal declaration that the company will not distribute AI-generated personalities, music, or songs specifically featuring synthetic vocalists or podcasts. The company encourages the use of so-called AI-powered operational tools, think scheduling, analytics, workflow automation, that kind of stuff. But the Guaranteed Human initiative simply cuts out generative content mimicking human creativity. Here's a quote from Pohlman. Quote, "When listeners interact with us, they know they're connecting with real voices, real stories, and real emotion. That's our superpower." End quote. The initiative is informed by iHeart internal research, which finds 90% of surveyed audience members want their media made by real humans, and 92% believe nothing can replace human connection, a figure that has risen sharply from 76% way back in 2016 in the pre-Gen AI media landscape. Finally, it's time for quick hits. These are articles I've covered them throughout the week that didn't quite make the cut for full story coverage today, but are still worth including in your weekend reading. Here's what I got for you today. The podcast show is set to return to London for its 5th year. Shout out to the Islington Business Centre. It's a cool building. For our 4th year running, Sounds Profitable is also back as a sponsor of the event, and we're keeping the good times rolling with our usual pre-show networking event that will happen the day before the event kicks off. Stay tuned for more specific times, dates, details as we get closer. Patreon has gotten into the podcast hosting game with the announcement of public RSS, allowing Patreon users to host their own podcasts on RSS feeds distributed from Patreon to the various major podcast distribution platforms. Triton Digital has published their 2025 Latin America Audio Insights Report, finding Portuguese language content dominates with 51% of all ranked podcasts, followed by Spanish at 42%, which together represent 93% of LatAm rankers. And finally, number 8, in partnership with Barometer, AdsWiz, and Sounds Profitable, has published a new study examining podcast advertising and consumption trends across 6 markets: the United States, Germany, Canada, the UK, France, and Australia, using data sourced from AdsWiz database of approximately 600,000 unique RSS feeds. That was the download recap brought to you by Sounds Profitable and Podscribe. I know I went through today's stories fast, so be sure to check the links to every article I just talked about by clicking the link in your show notes, which will take you to today's episode post on soundsprofitable.com. As usual, I'm Gavin Gaddis. Our producers are myself, Brian Barletta, and Tom Webster. Special thanks, as always, to you for sticking with me as I brought you all the top stories you might have missed this past week. Robot.
Download complete.